Okay, so the evolutionary history of life on Earth, and it has everything to do with the alternative lifestyle proposition, as this is who we truly are and where we have come from. Now, especially since Alfred Russel Wallace and Charles Darwin's time, scientists have been meticulously studying animal behaviours, species interactions, anatomies, diversification, evolution, distribution, and the absolute mass of millions of fossilised remains of pre-existing organisms, with the millions of examples of, let's say, intermediate species. It is what I think is the most fascinating and intriguing study of all studies, of which I think all people should have some kind of knowledge of. Okay, so we now know that the Earth has been constantly changing from cosmic radiation, asteroid impacts, big and small, to the immense forces of volcanism. From satellites today, we see land masses are moving at around the speed your fingernails grow. We know that land masses have been pushed together and spread apart over millions of years due to plate tectonics. Scientists read the Earth's geological formulation and the unique fossilised history of organisms they contain, from sedimentary deposits also laid down over millions of years. We know sea levels have changed and that there has been glacial and interglacial periods. We know that there has been extinctions of life and 5 major mass extinctions, followed later by mass radiation of species. Life forms themselves have also had a lot to do with changing the composition of the atmosphere, enriching the universal life-creating solvent of the earth, water, and carpeting the land green. As scientists explores and discovers the immense hidden natural history of the earth, so we should all become enriched with the knowledge of how to live in coherence with the earth, its cycles, its unique and natural wonders, and of its incredible evolving species of life. Now, before I go any further, what is scientific theory? Well, theory to almost all of you is just a theory. But to science, it means to investigate, study, observe and accumulate all the billions of tons of evidence that you would probably call facts. The theory of evolution is always under continuing refinement. As new areas of science emerge, scientists actually try to disprove theory, as this enforces knowledge, and knowledge is simply what science is all about. There is no conflict between science and religion, as religion has been going on for thousands of years and is based today upon the supernatural belief of some kind of God. Natural historical science is based upon what is now today conclusive evidence of the earth and all of its life's existence, as 97% of all life scientists now call the evolution of species fact. The trouble today is that of modern creationists, who try to bend and manipulate scientific facts to their delusion. Now, I think that if there are 2 sides to a story, then you should at least hear the other side. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I feel that the knowledge of natural science is paramount to a totally new understanding of a totally new system of life. As the science and accumulated knowledge of science makes you feel what you are, an evolutionary member of life with an intercorrelationship and ultimate respect for our living planet. Now, I'm going to go through this first part of the story of life as quickly as I can, until we reach our hominid ancestors, where things are a little more explained. So, our story of all life starts with the microbes of all life's existence, and there are 2 types of prokaryotic organisms, the archaeans and the bacteriums. Archaeans mean live within the hot rocky lithosphere of the earth and thermal springs of volcanism, and were only discovered in 1977 by a biologist putting his microscopic slide into a hot bubbling sulfur pool in Yellowstone National Park. Up until that time, it was thought that life could not exist in boiling temperatures and in highly toxic substances. Today, we now know that collectively the archaeans and bacteriums can live anywhere and off of anything. Scientists have found them not only in extreme heat, but thriving under pack ice in the most extreme cold, even in highly acidic and chemically toxic environments, and under extreme pressures. They can even switch off and come back to life when conditions are far more favourable. Prokaryotes are like nothing else on Earth. they have no nucleus to their simplistic single-cell structure, and there are no organelles, and there is no sexual reproduction. The one cell simply buds or divides, so 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 8, 16, and so on. One individual can become hundreds of thousands within hours, and they are tiny microscopic organisms of a massive variety. Some species are a lot bigger than others, but you cannot hardly see any of them with the naked eye. So where did these simplistic microscopic first life forms come from? Well, we know that the Earth and our solar system is some 4.6 billion years old, and we know that the prokaryotes were easily living here on the barren, hot, toxic primordial Earth of volcanism around 3.7 billion years ago. Now, there are possibly less than a handful of scientists at the best of times trying to nut out the proto-prokaryotic molecules of life. And there are 3 possible scenarios: that they come from other planets, comets or asteroids of the cosmos, termed panspermia, or that they originated here in the surface waters and archaic molecules of the Earth's primordial formulation, or they originated deep within the thermal vents of volcanism. And this is a small benefic octopus, mussels and tube worms that can be amongst all kinds of life, thriving off a chemosynthesizing bacterium in oceanic pitch-black darkness. Now, virons or viruses have also been around for an extremely long period of time, or so it seems, and may have a lot to do with prokaryotes and in the electron microscope to see them. Today are parasites or other life forms. Capacity to victim. They have evolved organisms and hijacking the cellular processes of cells to replicate. Over countless millions of years, microscopic organisms were the only form of life on Earth. And now the really interesting bit. There are somewhere around 10 times more prokaryotic cells living on, inside and around the far larger, more complex eukaryotic cells that your body is made up of. And your body is made up of around 30 trillion eukaryotic cells. There may also be microscopic fungi, viruses and protists living within your body. Bacterium right now is floating across your eyes, up your nose, in your ears. They are gorging themselves of the dead skin your body sheds every day. Under your armpits you smell them as BO. They are inside your mouth and used to fight any infection or decay. They once looked after your gums and dental hygiene many years ago when you lived as a forager on only wild, natural foods. Your entire immune system is modified microbes. There once was and should be well over 1 trillion bacterium living inside of your guts of well over 1,000 different types, feasting and breaking down food molecules to be processed and fed to other modified microbes that make up your very cellular structure. You see, you are not just one organism, you are a complex host. Prokaryotic microbes live on and within the eukaryotic cells your body is made up of. They formulated you. Your body is a living, thriving ecosystem made up of trillions of different microbes which all have a specific symbiotic job to do within you. So where do you think you came from? Well, my mum used to tell me she found me under a blackberry bush. Well, science now tells us a little different, and you evolved at the far end of this evolutionary kaleidoscope of time story. And if this tree of life showed every species of organism that had ever existed, its branches would spread all over the world and go from here to the stratosphere. Well, all right, not possibly that big, but big. Now, one of the very first species of bacterium, called cyanobacterium, photosynthesizes energy from the sun and slowly produced oxygen as a byproduct, which killed off many of the other first microbes that were anaerobic and could not sustain under an oxygenated atmosphere. We can still see the stromatolite colonies they build today, especially on the west coast of Australia. So this is something like the primordial Earth of volcanism with stromatolite colonies, after the first 1 billion or so years. And these are the stromatolite colonies that can be still seen up the west coast of Australia. Now, and your mitochondria is an organelle of aerobic respiration and produces molecules of ATP from what you eat. In other words, energy. So your mitochondria behaves very much the same as cyanobacterium. It even has its own DNA, which is different to your nuclear DNA, and self-replicates within almost every eukaryotic cell your body is made up of. Now, my hunch is that microbes used to protect you far more from other invading microbes and viruses, but not so much today, as our bodies today are massively depleted of symbiont microbes. Chloroplasts are very similar to our mitochondria and live within eukaryotic plant cells. They make plants green and photosynthesize the air that you breathe. The microbial relationship formulating the eukaryotic cell can be traced back to around 2 billion years ago, whereby an archaean ingested another microbial cell in an endosymbiotic relationship, whereby the two microbes benefited each other's company. This now more complex microbe then engulfs other benefiting microbes, formulating the organelles and the nucleus of the now far more complex eukaryotic cell. Some of these first eukaryotic organisms we call protists. Protists are primary microscopic and nearly all are single-celled. They are not animals, plants or fungi. One major group is the algals, which also photosynthesize. There are somewhere around 60 to 200,000 different species of protists, which nearly all still live in or around water. From single cells to multicellular eukaryotic organisms evolved and diversified. One species, the sea sponge, one of the very first multi-celled organisms, you can pull apart into separate individual cells, throw it back into water, come back later and find, like something out of a Terminator movie, it is all back together. At around 900 to 600 million years ago, the Earth went through a series of glaciations. You may have heard of the term snowball Earth. The very first complex organisms may well have had to have lived under ice sheets, possibly kept alive by the hydrothermal vents above the diverse world of chemosynthesizing organisms, or could have still thrived around hot volcanic uprising, which melted ice in some areas. Ice between rock crevices expand, breaking rocks apart. Immense glaciers move, and over millions of years wear away at mountains, grinding rock into sand and silt, and releasing minerals into ice and snow-covered valleys. At around 600 million years ago, massive volcanic eruptions spewed out carbon dioxide, which increased temperatures, melting snow and ice, making conditions for life far more favourable. There was the curiously diverse Ediacaran fauna that first evolved. Then at around 560 million years ago, aquatic conditions for life exploded with the start of the Cambrian. Now warm shallow seas, oxygen rich with dissolving minerals like calcium carbonate and phosphates, gave the soft-bodied organisms all the materials to absorb, rapidly evolving and diversifying, now living off of planktonic food particles, algae and each other. Taking up mineral particles, they could now formulate mouthparts, claws, spines, shells and external skeletal structures, the product of biomineralization. Now new organisms like coral polyps joined sponges, jellyfish, flatworms, sea urchins and starfish with aquatic arthropods, mollusks, crustaceans and trilobites. Trilobites that now existed with giant millipedes and sea scorpions being the top predators. By around 460 million years ago, aquatic plants had adapted and evolved to establish their domain of the wet muddy banks of rivers, floodways, deltas, water margins and coastlines, also photosynthesizing, adding to atmospheric oxygen and bringing life and habitat to the land. Now aquatic organisms, mainly as arthropods, took to the land and air as insects. As aquatic plants diversified and spread out over the land, they evolved ways of existing to the land and with marginal water. Plants later evolved symbiotic relationships with animals, insects, fungi, microfauna, and much later with birds. They also evolved defence mechanisms, defining the order and balance of life with a rich and varied food chain and establishing biodiverse ecosystems and habitats. And now we have finally come to us lot, the vertebrate organisms, of which we only make up around 2% of all life. And the first invertebrate organisms were fish. And it is the invertebrate organisms that account for around 98% of all life on Earth. Our origins, as well as nearly all phyla, go back to the Cambrionic period, of which we know so much about because of the immense fossilised remains of the Burgess shell, as well as other sites around the world. Pikaia was a kind of fish with a notochord. Today we still have lampreys, lancelets and hagfish with notochords. The notochord evolved into the spinal cord, and it was with the radiation of fish after a mass extinction episode around 440 million years ago that the vertebrates took off. Before us lot, there was the placoderms and the primitive sharks and cartilaginous fish. Then the ray fin fish that became by far the most prolific, and the lobe fins, from which we and all tetrapods are derived. Lobe fin fish are similar to tetrapods. Their limb structure is very much the same, with muscles like our arms. This is Tiktaalik, one of the first amphibians, showing limb structure from lobe fin fish to amphibians and to land-living vertebrates. The lungfish is a lobe fin that breathes air. Within the fossilised record, we see eyesight evolving and limb adaptations, with digits like salamanders. It's not hard to see how lobe-fin fish became land-living, giving rise to amphibians. Just like fish, amphibians reproduce by laying eggs in water that are externally fertilised. All amphibians must remain in a moist environment. At the larval stage, they are entirely aquatic and look like fish. Frog tadpoles look like fish, swim like fish, have gills like fish and eat vegetation. They then sprout legs, absorb their tails and turn into frogs, jumping, catching insects and breathing air, now with lungs. From amphibians, reptilians evolved. Reptilians, like fish, have scaly bodies that are watertight and protect the body from drying out, enabling reptiles to move away from the water's edge. They now lay amniotic eggs that are now internally fertilised. The eggs are protected by a hard or leathery shell, and the amnion supplies the developing embryo with nutrients. When the eggs hatch, the young resemble their adult parents, fully developed but in miniature form. The first amino animals resembled small lizards that evolved around 340 million years ago during the Carboniferous period. Two groups of amniotes evolved, the cerapsids that gave rise to reptiles, dinosaurs and birds, and the synapsids that gave rise to the early mammals, sometimes still referred to as the mammal-like reptiles, now referred to as the stem mammals. And today we have an extensive fossilised record of the stem mammals that used to be, showing prolific variation, with some traits of reptiles but most traits of mammals. This is the famous Dimetrodon. They range in size from rabbits to rhinos, and dominated the Permian period until the Permian Triassic mass extinction, the largest mass extinction of all time, referred to as the Great Dying, whereby around 90% of all species became extinct. One branch of reptiles that survived the diapsids became the most dominant land-living animals ever. We know them as the dinosaurs. They ruled the earth for over 160 million years, and while some were small, others were over 40 metres in length and weighed over 70 tons. They also inhabited the seas, and the air was patrolled by pterosaurs, which had wingspans of over 14 metres. The only group of stem mammals to have survived the great mass extinction were the cynodonts. The more modern mammals still in existence today are first the monotremes, that is the platypus and echidnas. These mammals are still in a kind of halfway point between reptiles and mammals. Mono means one, so waste and reproduction, as with reptilians and birds, happens through the same opening, the cloaca. Also, like reptiles and birds, monotremes lay external eggs that are now internally fertilized. Monotreme limbs splay out sideways, as with lobe-finned fish, amphibians and most reptilians. But monotremes also resemble mammals in having hair or fur, secrete milk from mammary glands, and are warm-blooded. The marsupial and placental mammals have a microscopic egg that is also internally fertilized. The developing embryo is withheld within the mother, now in a pond of amniotic fluid, which has a composition, as with the amniotic egg, similar to seawater. The marsupials give birth to live young still in the embryonic stage. The embryo crawls to a pouch and then latches onto a nipple that secretes milk. The placental mammals also give birth to live young, but in a far more advanced stage. Whilst in the womb, they are nurtured by the placenta. The young, when born, are now cared for and nurtured by the mother, who secretes milk from mammary glands, and you happen to be a placental mammal. The mammals during the extensive reign of the dinosaurs were mostly very small. Some nocturnal, some hibernated, and almost all burrowed into the ground, and kept a low profile until around 66 million years ago, when the dinosaurs died out along with many other families of animals and plants. A 10 to 12 kilometre asteroid striking the Yucatan Peninsula, we now know, was the cause of this mass extinction. The little furry mammals kept inside of their burrows were protected from the immense devastation. Mammals soon diversified and became prolific, filling every niche left behind by the mostly giant reptiles. Birds, insects and the flowering plants also became very prolific. Extensive grasslands now provided ample food for herbivores, diversifying the food chain. Some mammals returned to the water and the birds now filled the skies. Tropical rainforests became the most productive biodiverse environments on Earth. Through transpiration, evaporation and heat from the sun, a continued cycle of humidity, rainfall, coevolution and growth exists. Now, what do I mean by the order and balance of life? Well, I've just kind of explained it with tropical forest ecology. But first, let's take herbivores and carnivores. Herbivores get energy from eating plants through photosynthesis, and carnivores get their energy by eating herbivores that eat plants. They both produce waste that, through decomposing organisms, sustains the plants. Carnivores cannot eat out all the herbivores because that would be the end of all of them. They have evolved together over millions of years. The herbivores to avoid being eaten and the carnivores to bring down prey. The weak, diseased or stupid are taken out by all carnivores. It is not only survival of the fittest, but what I see is order and balance, with the most adaptable species that survive. Order and balance should also be everywhere, inclusive of ourselves, our guts, and even in our very own society. Okay, so now we have come to a point where we can all concentrate just on us. Okay, so who are you and where did you come from? When 23 chromosomes from mum and 23 chromosomes from dad came together, you were microscopic. Sperm cells have flagella, just like bacterium. You started life as a single cell, of which divided into multicells, just like that of the first microbial life. One divides into two, two becomes 4, 8, 16, and so on. As an embryo, you showed signs of where you came from, like gill slits and a tail. There have been babies born with a tail. Sometimes things don't go quite right with the generic blueprint. You were born out of an aqua environment and took your first breath of air. All life came from water and must still have water to survive. So rodents to primates is where you get your 2 front teeth from. The Human Genome Project was supposed to be finished by 2000. It took to 2003 and started in the 80s. Today, it only takes a few weeks for a specific species to be generically mapped. Today we know that rodents share around 85 to 90% of our very genes. That is why we still have horrific research labs for vivisection and experimentation, first used in rodents, then primates, then us. So from the prosimian primates to the old world monkeys and to the great apes of orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees and bonobos, we fill in the generic comparisons to an astonishing 98% identical relationship equally with those two guys at the top. We are closer to them than rats are to mice, closer than Indian elephants are to African elephants, even closer than the gorilla is to the chimpanzee and bonobo. Now, chimp society is male-dominated. The alpha male has to form alliances with other males. They can show compassion and empathy, but also fight to the death. Bonobos are far more fun-loving and caring, preferring to make love not war, are sex-mad, and prefer to settle any kind of dispute with a mass orgy. And of course, are female-dominated. Now, we can be like the chimp, at times extremely aggressive, or like the bonobo, hence the alternative lifestyle system is to be female-dominated. Yay! Just kidding. Scientific researchers that study the great apes do not look at them as anything much different to us. Using games, gadgets and experiments, they show they are uncannily the same. Now, we share a common ancestor with Pantroglodytes and Panpeniscus that lived around 7 million years ago, and there was a divergent split between their lineage, the Panins, and our lineage, the Hominins. And these guys are just some of our hominin ancestors, missing links, if you like, between that of the common ancestor that we shared with chimpanzees and bonobos and us today, Homo sapiens. We are today the only species left of what I think is the most intriguing, fascinating, complex group of organisms. Now, Charlie Darwin said that all people of today are the same species, and that if we looked hard enough, we would find our most distant ancestors where gorillas and chimpanzees live in Africa. He knew that they were our closest cousins, and he was exactly right. When I started my studies of human origins back in the 70s, we only had around half a dozen hominid species that have been found, but today we have more like 24 species that scientists have been fortunate enough to find and are still finding, adding to our knowledge of Paleolithic anthropology. Now, I'm going to start in the order of oldest and finish with the hunter-gatherers of our very own hominin species, and that live very much the same way of life as our more distant forebears. And what I show here is only some of the more important finds that we have fairly good representation of. Some finds are only fragments, with others of almost full skeletal remains. So, Sahelanthropus tachinensis, founded in Chad in 2001, lived somewhere around 6.5 million years ago, nicknamed the Millennium Man, so very close to that common ancestor. Another hominin, but not represented here, of which we only have fragments of, is Orient-tugenensis, founded in Kenya in 1974, lived around 6.2 to 5.6 million years ago. Ardipithecus ramidus, first founded in 1992, we have many specimens of this species that lived around 4.5 to 4.2 million years ago. The name means root of ground apes. Ardi has an opposable big toe for grasping, but also much of the foot has evolved towards bipedal walking, and there are 3 distinct species found so far. And this is the actual skeletal remains of Ardy's foot with a divergent big toe. And this is a paleo-artist example of what Ardy may well have looked like. Okay, Australopithecus anamensis. First founded in Kenya in 1965, lived around 4.2 to 3.9 million years ago. Australopithecus afarensis. First founded in 1974, nicknamed Lucy after the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds that was playing in camp that night. Lived around 3.7 to 3 million years ago in the Afar region of Ethiopia and at many other sites in East Africa. We even have fossilized footprints attributed to this species. Australopithecus africanus. Now, this specimen is the Tung child that was around 4 years of age when died, and it tells a bit of a story. Its founder, Raymond Dart, was a professor of anatomy working in Africa back in 1924. When this little bloke came into his possession, he knew at first glance that it was not an extant ape of today, and that it was not one of us. In chiselling and cleaning off the rock matrix, he see that there was no canine teeth, and in turning the skull over, the foramen magnum was more in the middle of the skull, much the same as us. The extant ape's foramen magnum is at the rear of the skull for knuckle walking, so he knew that this little bloke walked upright, bipedal, much like us. So this is a chimpanzee foramen magnum, and this is where the spinal column, at the angle of the spinal column joins the skull. This is us, and the angle of the spinal column that joins the skull with us for upright walking, knuckle walking. This is a better photograph, chimpanzee, us, and this is Schlanthropus tachirensis. Now, Dart tried to contact and communicate with England, the place at the time for natural history, telling them what he had found, and in Africa, where Darwin said to look. Up until this time, people were looking in Asia and Europe with a little success, but not very much. Dart was told by the establishment not to jump to any conclusions and basically to pee off, as they now had the missing link. This is the Piltdown Man forgery. It's an old modern human skull with an orangutan lower jaw and found in upper class England. That orangutan jaw fits sort of well. So this most significant, priceless find at the time, Dart kept as a paperweight on his desk until 20 odd years later, when another scientist came by the name of Robert Broom came to Dart's aid and found in 1947 other remains and another complete skull of the same species that Dart had found and named Australopithecus africanus, the southern ape of Africa. Only after this was Dart acknowledged, and soon after the search was on for our ancestors in Africa. The Piltdown Man forgery was finally taken off of public view in 1953. We now know also with other finds that the Tung child and his clan lived between 3.3 and 2.1 million years ago. There are some 9 distinct species of Australopithecus, and I am going to mention one other. Australopithecus sediba, founded near Johannesburg in 2008. This hominin is similar to other members of Australo, but also shows traits with our very genus Homo. Lived around 2 to 1.7 million years ago. Paranthropus boisei, nicknamed by the press at the time Nutcracker Man, first founded by the husband and wife team Lewis and Mary Leakey at Olduvai Gorge in 1959, also founded at other sites in East Africa. This species had become more specialised to consume tough vegetation. The molar and premolar teeth were over twice the size of ours. It has massive jaws and strong muscles which connected to a bony crest, much like that of the gorilla. Paranthropus lived from around 2.5 to 1 million years ago, and there are 3 distinct species found so far. And now we come to our very genus, meaning Homo. So this middle board is all about us, or Homo, our genus. Now, Louis Leakey, again, searching at Olduvai Gorge in Africa from around 1931, found primitive stone tools and stone flakes, which was named the Olduvai stone tool culture. It was not until almost 30 years later in 1960 that a partial hominin was found by Mary Leakey and was named Homo habilis, meaning handyman. Habilis' morphology was thought matched the ability to napstone with a slightly larger brain case, more human traits and a flatter face when compared to the Australopithecines. These stone tools may well have come about to obtain food scavenged from carnivores, and today the San people, and specifically the San Kung, plus other groups of sapiens in Africa can still do this. These ancestors may have been the first to learn to walk up to a group of lions at a kill site, cautiously and slowly approaching with weapons poised. And only after the lions have had a good fill of food do they leave the corpse, allowing the hominins to go to the kill, cut meat from the bone with incredibly sharp stone-flake blades, and if there was not much meat left, they would take much of the bones back to a base camp. The lions would then return to the kill if there was still meat. The bones taken were then split with the aid of a hammerstone or stone core to extract the marrow. Habilis lived from around 2.4 to 1.6 million years ago and had a brain case capacity of around 600 cubic centimetres. The Australopiths have a brain capacity of around 350 to 500 cubic centimetres. Now, there have been other remains of habilis discovered at other sites in East Africa. Homo rudolfensis. In 1972, Richard Leakey's team of fossil hunters found a fragmental but complete skull of this larger-brained hominin by the side of what is today Lake Turkana. The cranial capacity is around 750 cubic centimetres. Some anthropologists put this species together with habilis, calling them the habilins. This find is around 1.9 million years old. And today at another site in Kenya, other primitive stone tools have been found at an earlier age of around 3.3 million years ago, called the Lumaquim, quite possibly made by the Australopithecines, Lucy's gang, or even Paranthropus. Okay, so this is Homo augustus whilst in Africa, and Homo erectus when migrating out of Africa. And we have many remains or individual remains of this species. In 1984, Richard Leakey's team again found an almost complete skeletal remains of this 13-year-old hominin on the west side of Lake Turkana. And this is him and this is us. As an adult, he would have stood nearly 6 feet tall. His body proportions are very much the same as us, but is slightly more robust. This guy could get up and run. He was far more adapted for a terrestrial life out on the savannah. Now with longer legs he could stride out. Shorter arms kept balance, and like us, muscular glutes, ligaments, tendons and feet, much the same, also enabled balance and strength for distance running. He had a sleek midsection and a chest much the same. His body, also like us, may have become mainly hairless, with sweat glands providing moisture over the body, which cools the body whilst running. His Archulian stone tools had increased to skillfully crafted, teardrop-shaped and bifaced hand axes, of which he used like a Swiss army knife, and some of these stone hand axes were massive. He may have also hunted the same as the Kung, bushman of our very species, whilst not having a bow and arrow with poisoned arrow tips to severely injure an animal. Augustus could have used a spear or his immense hand axe, thrown to injure an animal and then giving chase. The Kung can run for miles. Antelope are very fast, but only over short distances. We, and quite possibly Augustus, would have had immense endurance and can still breathe whilst running. Our head is balanced and cushioned over the torso, Our eyes can fix onto a moving subject or follow tracks whilst on the move. After a while of being chased, the animal can go no further and the hominins have dinner. There is also evidence that Augustus used fire, so his dinner may well have been cooked. Fire is also used to keep predators at bay, plus for warmth and to sit around, talk and ponder whilst roasting things like chestnuts. Not only did Augustus have unique dexterity with a precision grip, cognitive ability and a larger brain case capacity, and used his greater intelligence and adaptations to migrate out of Africa and into the many different terrains and habitats of the world now as Homo erectus. We have found his remains in Europe, Eurasia, China and Southeast Asia, where the very first erectus remains were found in Java in 1887. There is much discussion between anthropologists at present due to the many different fossilised finds and as to represent some of these finds as different species. There seem to be two kinds of Homo erectus, one with smaller stature and brain case volume of around 600 to 900 cubic centimetres, and one of a larger stature with a brain case of up to around 1200 cubic centimetres. Erectus roamed the earth for almost 2 million years, and over this extensive time period, what we could very well be looking at and comparing with all the different finds is simply the traditional forms of Homo erectus. So, from Homo habilis to rudolfensis to erectus to heidelbergensis. The transition of body type and sophistication, morphology and increasing brain case size is simply leading to evolutionary advancements adapting to the terrestrial environment. Erectus could well have also given rise to the beautiful little 1 metre dwarfed Homo floresiensis, and to a new find, or fairly new find in the Philippines, Homo luzonensis. Okay, Homo naledi. Now, amateur cavers discovered bones of what to them were very human type in a very deep and awkward cave chamber in South Africa, and told Lee Berger, a paleoanthropologist. A staggering almost 2,000 fossil bones of 15 individual hominins were recovered. These hominins had many primitive features but also a kind of recent morphology. This site may well have been used as a resting place for their dead, where the members of their clan carried their dead into the cave all the way through narrow passages to the main chamber, but only 250,000 years ago. Their brain size was much the same as the Australopiths, but the date of this find is very, very recent. So this species may have lived for hundreds of thousands of years in isolation and died out as another evolutionary dead end. Homo heidelbergensis. This species is a kind of mix between erectus and the Neanderthals. They may have been the first to half stone points to spears and made more complex Acheulean stone tools. They hunted large prey animals and are thought by most anthropologists to have given rise to the Neanderthals and to us, Homo sapiens. Their brain size was around 1100 to 1300 cubic centimetres, which is very close to us. They have been found in Africa and Europe and at Boxgrove in England, and lived from around 700 to 130,000 years ago. Homo neanderthalensis, and this is the skeletal, full skeletal remains of Homo neanderthalensis. This obviously is us. Lived from around 400 to 28,000 years ago. They inhabited almost the whole of Europe and many parts of Western Asia. During their time there were many glacial periods. Living especially in Ice Age Europe would have been extremely hard going. They sought shelter in available caves and lit fires for warmth and to cook foods. They hunted the big game animals of woolly rhino, mammoth, cave bears, wild boar, ibex and deer. In other areas like the Mediterranean coast, they hunted and gathered great quantities of seafoods. In more forested and grassland areas, They sourced mushrooms, grass seeds, nuts, mosses and other vegetation that varied their diets. Neanderthals made more sophisticated tools. They made and wore clothing. Their hunting techniques of big game meant for extremely close contact. Their spears would have had to been thrusted at an immense force to penetrate the well over 1 inch thick hides of animals like mammoth. Many Neanderthal skeletal remains bear the marks of fractures and broken bones, possibly from fighting immense prey like 3.5 metre tall giant cave bears. Neanderthals buried many of their dead. Pollen grains have been analysed within grave sites, so flowers may have been laid with the deceased. And this is a possible Neanderthal reconstruction, burial. They were immensely strong people, with stocky bodies, a barrel-like chest and a large nose, all thought to be adaptations to the cold climate. Their brain size even exceeded us sapiens and measured from 1200 to a massive 1750 cubic centimetres. We have remains and full skeletal remains from hundreds of individuals of this species. DNA has been extracted from Neanderthals, and most of us today, especially Europeans, have their genes living on within us. Look at this. Sloping forehead, big nose, and bushy eyebrows. Can't see a thing, that's better. Now, the impression of the past portray Neanderthals as a brutish primitive klutz, holding on to a club, but we now know that these people were extremely intelligent, with a complex culture not unlike our own. Okay. Now, the ancestors of our genus had increasingly, over time, huge craniums and long from front to back, with a low forehead but accommodating an increasingly advanced brain. So this is a Neanderthal and this is us, and a different kind of cranium. Homo erectus, so this is Homo erectus, Neanderthalensis, and Neanderthalensis and Heidelbergensis, sorry. Now, Homo erectus, still with big brow ridges and a kind of muzzle. And our more distant ancestors over there, the Australopiths and the ones beforehand, had a very small brain case and not much bigger than chimps or bonobos, and a very prognathic muzzle, of which over time became a far more flatter face. And we have a dome-shaped cranium, a high forehead, or most of us, and like these two guys, a protruding snout, or should I say nose. And these lines are all we have left today of a muscle. We also have a chin bone. Now, this guy here was founded in Israel around 120,000 years ago. So one of us, the huge dome-shaped cranium, even shows a slight chin bone. But what got me was the amount of prognathism within, and so depending on where you go in the world today, you will see some people with a very small, flatter nose, others with big noses, sloping foreheads, brow ridges to no brow ridge, people with far more hair all over their bodies, like the first of our ancestors, to people with almost no hair, dark skin to jet black skin to snow white. And if we look here at chimpanzees, white face, and if we look at the bonobos, black. Tall slim bodies to short squat bodies, even people with a more prognathic or differating facial features. Some people are massive while others are small and petite, with different eye colours, hair colours, thousands of different linguistics or languages and cultures, And all of this is just traits and adaptations from our past to be acknowledged with pride of knowing who you are and where you have truly come from. Okay, so now just another quick look back before I finish off with us Homo sapiens. We're almost at the end. So these, the first of us of our ancestors, are in a receding forest habitat. The tropical rainforest belt, that's the word I was looking for, runs stretched right across Africa. Chimps, bonobos and gorillas are over here in more dense forests. They went that way. Now here is the Great Rift Valley. The eastern side is drying out into more open savanna and grassland plains, and also of herbivores and carnivores, even of saber-toothed cats. So our ancestors, mostly living in and around the Great Rift, were an extremely vulnerable group of primates. The Australopithecines became more established to life on the ground, foraging for food but still half in the trees to escape predators, and possibly, like the great apes, sleeping on a nest platform at night. The Paranthropus species specialised on available vegetation, possibly around lakes and river habitats, and our very genus Homo became increasingly advanced to the terrestrial environment, specialising in stone tools, scavenging meat and hunting, as well as eating plant foods, insects and anything edible. Increased brain capacity coincides with advanced nutrition, locomotion and manipulative dexterity of the hands to make complex tools. So now, standing tall, utilising fire, and with increased technologies to hunt, some of us as Homo erectus ventured out of Africa and adapted to the many different habitats of the world and gave rise to new species. Now we come back to our species, to our very species, Homo sapiens. And our very species also evolved in the cradle of hominin existence, Africa. The dates of us goes further back in time. The more we learn, the more we find. We now have evidence of us in Morocco at around 315,000 years ago. Sapiens are more athletic and are more gracile than other species of our genus. Our brains average around 1,350 cubic centimetres. Grave sites of ritual burials with offerings of a possible belief in the afterlife appear at around 100,000 years ago. Our species first left Africa at around 120,000 years ago, and that was the remains of those people that was found in Israel. But it is thought that those pioneers either died out or returned to Africa. But at 70 to 80,000 years ago, other groups of sapiens left their homeland of Africa and ventured into new territories, and on possibly many occasions either see or encountered other hominins. First the Neanderthals, and further into Asia the Denisovans. In 2010, in the Denisovan cave, Siberia, a few tiny fossil fragments of a hominin was found: a tooth, a piece of skull bone, and a small piece of pinky bone. But generic scientists were able to extract DNA and found that the Aita people, that is the first people to inhabit the Philippines, New Guineans and Australian Aboriginal people, as well as others that started to inhabit these southern regions back 70 to 80,000 years ago, had from 5 to 0.5% Denisovan DNA as part of their generic makeup. Denisovans were kind of cousins of the Neanderthals and still inhabited the Asian region at the time of sapient migration. We now have other fossils found in China that could very well be Denisovan. Also at around this time, we would have also shared the world with Homo florensis, Homo luzonensis, and quite possibly still with Homo erectus. Now, we know that we interbred with the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, but we also fight. as all these groups of people had died out by around 28,000 years ago. Many of the Neanderthals have been found with fractured and broken bones. Could this have also been the result of us, even more sophisticated people? The climate for almost all of this time was Ice Age cold, but we, the superhumans, were also super advanced. Super advanced. Now with even more sophisticated tools made from wood, stone, bone and antler, and with new inventions like the spear thrower, bows, harpoons, animal traps, snares, fish hooks and fish nets, could now more easily include all food items. And I wish I could have found far more artifacts like this to showcase the kind of culture that we once had. These are fish traps here and here. The tide comes in, goes back out, leaving fish behind for dinner. Now, as our tools and hunting weapons became fine instruments of accuracy and precision, not only did we learn to bind, glue and half-deadly sharp stone or bone tip points to harpoons, arrowheads and spears, but incorporated blood grooves and barbed tip points. As our species spread throughout the world, there became cultural differences between isolated groups. Close to the equator, remained relatively warm. Following the coasts and living off the sea, coastal lagoons and reefs, and also with the skills and knowledge of now being able to build rafts and boats, people could now inhabit islands and the island continent of Australia and New Guinea. Look at how many people are on this raft. This is a bark canoe and this a dugout canoe. This man from the Northern Territory, the bow there is being used with a spear thrower or woomera. That increases the velocity of that spear 3 times. He also carries a spare spear, a hunting boomerang and a stone axe. Now, with full control of fire and now with tailored leather clothing, the great hunters planned and followed the once immense herds of animals into Eurasia and the freezing north. They hunted bison, mammoth, reindeer, seals, woolly rhino, ox and elk of the tundra. Over a relatively short period of time, people had adapted themselves uniquely to living in the permanent sub-zero temperatures of the far north, hunting marine animals, fish, birds and Arctic animals. They lived almost exclusively on raw animal flesh and expanded their territories now from Siberia to Alaska and down into the Americas. Okay, so these are people from the Upper Paleolithic, and this is a giant cave bear that used to be. This mammoth has been driven into a boggy swamp for easier prey. These guys are Maglodanian. These are dressed up as reindeer and hunting reindeer. These guys are hunting or bringing down birds with those sharp stone points to their spears. This is the aurochs. Now this was quite a beast of burden. It was 6 foot tall at the shoulder. It became extinct, but not until around the 16th century. And all of your domestic cattle today come from this. These guys are Inuits of that freezing, of the freezing north. So living amongst solid ice and snow. And here they are hunting seals. And this guy's just waiting for the seal to pop his head up. Now, large herbivores outside of Africa had never encountered such a sophisticated predator as us. Hunter-gatherers like these people, still kind of in existence today, in general, had plenty of time to amuse themselves. They made beautiful instruments, sang and danced. They adorned themselves with paint and made jewellery from seashells, pearls, beads of amber, polished ivory, bits of bone and animal teeth. They carved timber, bone and ivory, and moulded animals and figurines from clay. There were many games and pastime activities like basket making, weaving, tool making, making animal traps and snares, drying hides and making clothes or building shelters. Paint was made from ground rock ochre, charcoal, clay and animal fat. Images and animals were portrayed on rock shelters and in caves. So all of these, or most of them, are from Australia. So these are the Mimi from the Arnhem Land, the Wodgina from the Kimberleys. This one is from France, Lascaux Cave. These two are from Northern Australia, and this because of the First Fleet. In Europe, many deep caves have been found where the artists used lamps of burning animal fat to illuminate the walls and roof to portray their fantastic works of mythological animals and the animals of subsistence. All contemporary hunter-gatherers had a great respect, knowledge and caring for the natural world. The Australian Aboriginal people not only cared greatly for the land, but under their verbal constitution had to leave the earth in the same or an even better state than they found it. So for their children there was an abundance of resources and food for generations to come. They became the caretakers for order and balance. Through their mythology, their lives had purpose and meaning. Hunter-gatherers' interpretation of creation goes back possibly as much as 150,000 years or even more. Their stories bonded each other together and to the natural world. Sitting around a campfire, kids would be mesmerised by the fascinating tales told by the great-grandparents of the great ancestral spirits, like that of the rainbow serpent, who formed the land. As the giant reptile slid along, it cut out the rivers and valleys. It then went underground and pushed up the hills and mountains. The serpent still exists today in the form of a rainbow that mysteriously appears when the conditions for life to expand exists, rain and sun, to see that we, the caretakers, are looking after the land and all of its life. Hunter-gatherer people ate only natural foods of an immense variety. The women and children gathered an astonishing array of plant foods, while the men hunted for the choice food, meat. They lived off around 150 different types of food. These people suffered very little, if at all, from any illnesses or diseases. They had perfect dentition, great strength and outstanding endurance, and uniquely lived within the confines of nature, as of all life. The original people of Australia once lived in a very unique way, as all hunter-gatherer people once did. They could not overexploit the land. Many of them knew how to grow certain foods and how to farm fish, and how to enrich the land before rains by controlled fire. These people were the first to use grindstones for making flour from wild grass seeds baked in the coals of a fire. They cleared certain areas of bush to plant and maintain natural flora and fauna. They didn't take any more than they needed to survive, and monitored species numbers for continued survival. They lived in bands. Each band of people had a given territory of which to live off of and to maintain, coming together at certain times for ceremonies, corroborees, initiation or marriage, or to trade or to share foods. Each band of people related in numbers to what their given area could sustain. These people lived in ultimate harmony with the earth, and like all organisms, our ancestors were greatly exposed to all the elements, climatic variations and dangers of living in a wild existence. There was broken bones and infections, open wounds, maybe even childbirth complications, of which they had their own ways of bush medicine and dealing with adverse situations. Life for them was exciting and enduring. Now, a couple of years ago, I bumped into a woman whilst on holiday and got talking, and she asked me, why are we not all told about all of this? And I replied, because our society today has recently culturally evolved on delusion, currency and ignorance. And this is where we are going in the last program, and if you have stuck with me, thank you for your time, patience and understanding. Thank you.